You're listening to the Nabs Now podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Nabs Now podcast. I am Noah Carver, and it is such a pleasure to have you listening. Today we have an excellent packed show for you, and we have some fantastic panelists here. Before we get to that, though, I'd like to introduce someone who you're going to hear from a lot in the next year or so. One of the many new voices we have coming on in Nabs Now podcast land. Her name is Akliesia, and she is here to do a little bit of introduction and also is involved with the hosting and the back end side of things. So Akliesia, welcome to Nabs Now. How about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Noah, so much for having me on. And my name is Akliesia. I serve as the co-chair for content creation. I'm also a sophomore at Boston University. I study data science. And currently, I'm at LCB wrapping up training, and I'm so excited to co-host with you and to record this episode.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here, Akliesia. Thank you so much for hopping into this position and for joining the NABS family. We love to have you here. So, today's episode is all about the lovely world of roommates and navigating the world of having a college roommate or a roommate in general as a blind person. And we thought, what better people to have on than this lovely panel? So we have here Casey Reyes and Nikki Dadlani. So Casey and Nikki, I'm going to come around to you guys and do a little bit of introduction. Casey, how about you introduce yourself? Where are you from? What do you study? What are you up to in NABS and NFB land?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Casey Reyes. Thank you so much for the generous invite to come and be a panelist on the NABS Now podcast. I am currently a senior at the University of Utah, studying strategic communication and double minoring in business management and psychology, all with the hopes of working in public relations, specifically in crisis management. Currently, as far as NFB involvements, I serve as vice president of our Utah Association of Blind Students, and I also serve on the national level as a co-chair for our wonderful membership committee. Let's get this party started.
You know, when I was putting this together, I really did not think about the membership committee angle, but it turns out that Nikki is also the chair of the membership committee. So did not at all plan that, but very serendipitous. Nikki, take it away.
Well, you just did part of my introduction for me. But hello, everybody. It's good to be here with the rest of the crew doing this podcast. And yes, Casey is just as amazing as well. My name is Nikki Dadlani. I am currently the secretary of the National Association of Blind Students. And as mentioned, I'm also the chair of the membership committee. And we have some awesome, amazing initiatives, including our shiny WhatsApp community, along with some other things we are currently working on. I'm also a student at the University of California, Berkeley, aka Cal, studying political science with a minor in public policy. My wish one day is to go into the law to study more about the intersection between partisanship and trust in governmental institutions. I'm looking forward to talking about this very important issue. And as Casey said, let's get this show on the road.
Super cool. Super, super cool. And there's one part that we did not cover just yet. So both Nikki and Casey are going to be talking about this from, of course, the blind student's perspective, but also Nikki uses a cane. Yes, Nikki? You're primarily a cane user? And yes. Casey, you are primarily a dog user, yeah?
That is correct.
All right, super cool. So in other words, we're getting both sides of the roommate gambit from a cane user and a guide dog user. So let's start with the questions, y'all. How about it? Y'all feeling ready for this?
Yes, sir.
Gee, that was in unison. That was excellent. All right. So moving on, what was or is your living situation like? Are you living with roommates now, or was that a previous situation on or off campus, et cetera, et cetera? Have you had multiple roommates? Just a general sort of summary of your experience.
As I mentioned, I started here at UC Berkeley in fall of 2023, and I was actually able to obtain a single room in the on-campus housing in an apartment-style unit. And it's a townhouse setup. We have 4 bedrooms here. 3 of them are on the ground floor, and 1 is upstairs. And I mentioned that for a reason that'll become more apparent later on in the show. I have my own room, so do the other folks in the apartment here. We share a kitchen and some other common areas. 2 of my roommates have been constant since I started here at UC Berkeley, and 1 more moved out at the end of last school year in May and was replaced by another individual. And I would say overall, my relationships with them have been quite positive, with some hiccups in the road, which we will get to.
Cool. What about you, Casey?
For me, so I have experience living in a dorm setting as well as an apartment setting. As far as the dorm setting, there's actually quite a lot of people who live inside my dorm. I think there's a total of 8 of us, and I did have a roommate, and that was actually a very crazy time because that was where I had to do the most of my educating in terms of how people can approach my guide dog. And, I had to set a bunch of ground rules. But also, I should point out that this was at a time where I was earlier on in my journey as a guide dog user. So I wasn't completely sure of how to advocate for myself, and I wasn't completely sure how to set ground rules. And so some of my roommates were able to wander all over me and my dog. And so it was a really stressful situation, but I got used to it. I got advice from one of our mentors from the Utah Guide Dog Users Group, and they were able to help me, set some ground rules with my roommates and kind of be a better advocate for myself and my dog to make sure that all of our needs are being met. And then very recently, I got an apartment with one of my good friends, and there's about 4 of us living in it, and this is an off-campus apartment. And that was a little bit of a way more chill situation because, of course, I knew someone who was there with me who had my back. And so that was great to have the familiarity. But then there's 2 other guys also in this apartment that I had to advocate for. So I had to take my learned lessons that I had learned when I was living in the dormitory setting and kind of apply them. But this time I was a lot more prepared. And so I do think that once that transition took place, I was able to advocate for myself and my needs and set some ground rules. And it was a very successful experience.
Thank you so much, Casey. Really appreciate it. And we're going to drill into sort of the challenges and perks of living with a guide dog and living with roommates while living with a guide dog and all of that jazz really shortly. So we will drill into the things that hath been foreshadowed.
So that's perfect because my next question for the both of you is how did you guys communicate your needs as both a cane user and a guide dog handler? And how did you advocate for yourselves, especially with your peers, but more importantly with your roommates? And how were those experiences? Was it positive? Was it negative? And sort of how did you deal with the aftermath of those conversations?
Sure, yeah. So for me, I had to set ground rules earlier on in life, like prior to moving into the dorm and prior to moving into the apartment setting. I had to do a lot of preparation work, and I'm an overthinker, right? So something that helps me to prepare is to think worst case scenario, right? So what are some things that I don't want to happen? I don't want my roommates to feed my dog. I don't want my roommates to touch my dog on a harness, so I had to think of all the things that I didn't want to happen. And then I kind of worked my way backwards. Those conversations with my roommates were not easy because, they're not inside the blind community. And of course, they're not educated on this kind of stuff. So it's really on you, the guide dog user, to really give them a good explanation so they completely understand. And part of this process encompassed a lot of questions that I would perceive to be kind of dumb, but really they're not because they don't know any better. This is the first time that they've been exposed to a guide dog or even a blind person in general. And so a lot of those conversations they felt mundane and they felt kind of annoying at times because those conversations did go to, oh, so can you see these 3 fingers in front of you? Or can you see me if I stick my tongue out at you? Does your dog know how to go take you to the nearest Starbucks? Stuff like that. And so I really, really had to take my time to explain to them all the do's and don'ts, especially living with a guide dog. But I also did it in a way that it seemed very balanced. Like, yes, when my dog is on, there's absolutely no touching. And of course, there are ground rules for when she is off duty for things that they cannot do. But I also made it fun. Like I did say, oh, when we're not working, we're just hanging around the house. Feel free to play with her. Feel free to interact with her in any way that you can, any way that you want, because she's here as well. So she has a right to interact with you. And if anything, it's just gonna help this transition process ever more. And so in the beginning, it was pretty rocky, especially with those people who didn't know anything about blindness and had never even met a blind person. So it was a very, very big change. And a part of that was, of course, they moved the furniture around and just a lot of things happened that I had to move past and a bunch of growing pains. But after a period of about or 6 months living there, we were able to kind of work our way seamlessly together. And I think that it turned out really, really well, considering we did renew our lease to stay together and agree to split the rent several ways and whatnot. And so translating long term, I mean, I still talk to them to this day, and we're still very, very good friends. And it's actually funny because one of them actually wants to go into to be a teacher for the blind, which is actually hilarious, considering that started from our education. So, I mean, if anything, I learned from being a guide dog user who lives with roommates is there's always going to be opportunities out there for you to educate your peers, to educate the general public, and you really never know where that's going to translate to long term.
Wow, thank you so much. That was such an insightful response. And I think so many of our listeners can kind of sympathize and also relate to your experiences and sort of take notes and get ideas from how you handled situations in the past.
So my experience has been interesting in that there was, kind of like what Casey mentioned, a lot of education need to be done. Like I remember when I first moved into my apartment last August in 2023, it was kind of interesting. And also just as a precursor as well, this is the first time I had been kind of living on my own. So there was just a bit of adjustment on my part as well. But it was interesting to just have conversations with all my roommates about like, oh, hey, like if you could please like assist me with just a couple things, for example, like how to adapt, say, I think I adapted one of the appliances in the kitchen or something like that. That was just a bit of an interesting conversation we had as well. And I think one thing that helped in this transition as well was one of my roommates is actually who I still live with now, has some vision loss, much like so it's quite a bit of usable vision, but he also is able to kind of like to some extent relate to some of the concerns I had or changes I need to make, but in a very different sense. The other thing too that helped in my sense was just bonding with my roommates and talking to them about what I was up to and talking to them. It helped too that they saw one of my friends who goes to the same school who's also blind come to the apartment just 3 times to relax and hang out. Just in terms of cane usage, it was just I would say that in my case there wasn't as much like education, just in terms of more of them getting used to being around. I remember at one point they, colloquially as many do, call it one of my roommates called it a stick or something. But we made a good joke out of that. Got over that pretty quickly. Everyone knows what it is now, of course, and things like that nature. But getting into something a bit different with that as well is the gentleman who lived here last year, who lived upstairs and who didn't really spend as much time with us, was a very different story in terms of the blindness adaptation aspect. He, I had approached him a couple of times just to ask him for help with some identification things or to just help with a couple of things I needed. And this was more of a sense of temperament, perhaps on his part, but he was not what a bit more of an unpredictable individual, if you will. And one day mentioned to me that I, was asking for too much help from him essentially, and that I was, that if I needed help with certain things, I should not be there in essence. And that was a very just a very somewhat of difficult experience to have. And luckily in that sense, we talked it out together, and we also actually all the four of us discussed that along with several other issues we had, and we were able to resolve our differences. But I will say as well that this experience did show that like ignorance does exist, that people's perceptions can be negative, and that work needs to be done to some extent to overcome those negative perception. However, one thing I will say before I wrap up is that I feel so very fortunate to have such great roommates, even especially now in this semester, who have been so very kind, supportive, and who I've been able to have a pretty decent and fun time with throughout the year.
Thank you so much. And I think that most of what both of you have said plays a huge role in a lot of the experiences that we as blind people have. But more importantly, it foreshadows some of the questions that are to come, and sort of we'll be delving into the nitty-gritty of how you dealt with disagreements and all of that. So Noah, take it away.
Sure. So now we're getting now into the weeds a little bit of things. And my question is, did you have specific negative experiences requiring advocacy for yourself and your dog, if applicable, with your roommate or roommates? And if so, how did you deal with those?
So, in regards to disputes that me and my roommates had to go through when we were first moving in together and learning how to be around each other, is my roommates, like especially one of them, they could not understand that yes, This is a dog. Pretty much every time that he ate something, whether it be a snack or he was cooking, he would like purposely drop it on the ground or offer it to my dog. And that was very, very, very bad because, the guide dog schools, they teach that your dog should not be having any other food besides the food that is prescribed to them or the food that you're feeding to them on a consistent basis, as they have very, very sensitive digestive systems. And I didn't know that this was happening because I couldn't see it, and there's no one there to tell me that it was happening. However, things got like way worse when I found out from someone else who wasn't living with me. I think I brought a friend over or something like that to come hang out, and she told me, "Do you know that so and so just fed your dog this?" And I was like, "What?" And it just clicked in my head that this could have been happening for much, much longer because my dog was experiencing digestive issues for a while since we had moved in. And I wasn't sure if it was because of stress of moving into a new environment or stress of the workload or some other underlying health issue. And so I was consulting my vet constantly and, we're trying to problem solve what exactly was causing this. And so, of course, when I found out, I was very, very upset. Initially, I didn't handle it the best way because I completely blew my lid against my roommates, which is very understandable coming considering the circumstances. But soon after that, I think it took me like maybe a day or so to get over this. I just had a conversation with all of them, even the good roommates who, were not partaking of this behavior. And I had to sit him down and, just tell him straight up, I cannot have you guys feeding my dog anything, anything at all. The only thing that she should be eating is the food that I give her. She can have treats every now and again, but I did not allow that at all. And I'm not a very confrontational person. I'm very calm. I like to think that I can keep my cool, but in this instance, I just completely lost it. And so I do think that that kind of damaged my perception and relationship with my roommates, what they thought of me and I thought of them. And so this did take some time to pass through. And when I was having the conversation with them on why they cannot do this, I mean, like I said, they didn't know because granted, a lot of them, they had their own dogs. And so I presume that they also just gave their dogs whatever, right? Based on why this behavior was happening. I had to be very strict and assertive with them, asserting my needs with them. And this was the first time outside of the school setting that I had to do this. And so for me, it was very new and it was very stressful, but I had to do what I had to do for the good of my dog, for the good of me, independence, and just for the good of our partnership. So when I did that, my roommates, of course, after I blew up at them and I was just very, very upset, understandably so, they did not talk to me even after I had sat them down and talked to them about it. And so I do think that it took them some time to fully process what I said and really understand it. But luckily, these group of guys that I lived with, they're good at heart, stubborn, but like I'm stubborn too, So fortunately, we were able to work things out. We were able to understand, and like I said, after I talked to them and they were able to process everything, and of course they came back with questions because after an emotional situation like this, they're gonna have questions just so that we can fully move our way towards a solution. And to be honest, some of the questions that they were asking me, I didn't know how to respond to because the one constant argument that they kept bringing up is your dog is a dog, and that's number one thing. Yes, they're a guide dog, but first through and through they're a dog. But the thing that they couldn't understand is yes, she was a dog, but she is a dog with a certain responsibility to keep me, her handler, safe. And by them continuing this behavior, that puts our pairing and my independence, so to speak, in jeopardy. And so once I told them that, that was the one thing that once I really drilled that point that she's basically my eyes, that's when they really, really came to terms with it and their whole behavior changed. Like that's really when they started to really, really respect my ground rules, respect me as a person, respect my dog, what she does. And the great responsibility she has and the job that she does every day that we go to school, work, whatever. And I do think that when that happened, I mean, of course, when that behavior stopped, I was great. I didn't have to keep going to the vet and worrying all the time. And when we got past that, it was fantastic. It was really, really great because finally we both understood each other. Finally, we all came to an understanding that this behavior cannot happen. And I'm just very happy that it happened. I mean, I'm not happy that that they found my dog and I had, she was like sick for a time. I'm just happy that we were able to come to a solution together because to be completely honest with you guys, I really did not think that we were gonna make it through that mess. But this was a very, very low time in my time living with them. And after that, I just feel great that we were able to move past it. I think everybody, including myself, learned a lot from this experience.
Thanks a lot, Casey. And I mean, I'm really happy that despite the feeding of the dog and how the situation ended up being handled, I'm really happy that your relationship with your roommates remained intact and also your relationship with your dog was fine and that things sort of sorted themselves out. And I really appreciate you kind of saying, hey, here's what I did well, here's what I didn't do so swimmingly. So here's some things to learn from. Nikki, what would you answer to this same question?
Thank you so much. So I would say that, kind of like what I mentioned before, one of the main experiences I had was with the individual who, kind of talked about like me being a burden and me constantly asking for help and things of that nature. And, kind of like what Casey described, my reaction at the beginning when I first heard that was kind of like shock to some extent. I was like, wait, what? And, that was I recall when this happened was a day that not everybody was around in my apartment. And, I think from what I recall, when this happened, I went to one of the other gentlemen who was around, somebody else who was here, and told him, I was like, hey, this is what happened. Like, and he apparently like kind of happened to overhear I guess I call the confrontation that occurred there. And so, he said, okay, well, let's talk about it. And essentially what happened was the four of us in the apartment all kind of scheduled a meeting for the next day when everyone was like available because, that was probably the best like course of action that we thought of to do. And it was, kind of an open conversation. And I discovered that we all pretty much like, obviously, and he was very like apologetic about that specific situation. And we resolved our disagreements. I'll just say is going forward a little bit that despite that disagreement and in spite it actually, we like as a whole on the unit had a problem with this individual just with other things that he did and did not do, if you will. So while that disagreement was one thing, there was other issues as well. And we all, during that conversation I just mentioned, we all kind of also talked about how we all could be better roommates towards each other and how we can use the common areas in a shared way and how we all could learn from one another's mistakes as well. So I think in the end, it came to a productive ending, but yet there were still more issues to come in. So yeah.
Thanks a lot, Nikki. At least it came to some sort of resolution,
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll just say real quick, he is luckily not living in this apartment anymore, so which is good.
Yes. Okay, so he's not going to come down the stairs, pound on your door, and said, "You said what about me?" Moving on. Akliesia, you're up.
So this advocacy topic that we're currently discussing fits perfectly into the next question that I have for the both of you, because advocacy is super important when living with other people, especially when divvying up tasks and responsibilities. So with that being said, my question for the both of you is, how did you guys sort of manage general responsibilities and tasks as a cane user and living with roommates, and how were you able to communicate that and deal with your day-to-day life?
Sure. So as I kind of mentioned, we had a conversation at the very beginning of the semester just with how to divide up the like tasks, for example, like cleaning certain common areas, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that was very, to some extent, like, new to me, but also was a learning experience was with the taking out of the trash on a regular basis. Obviously, I was more than willing to do it, but it took just a bit of like education to some extent to understand what the proper procedure was for, taking out the trash, separating it, which is a big thing here, and putting it in the right receptacles. And actually, I asked one of my roommates to help me with with that at one point, at like somewhat into the first semester I was here, and he was more than willing to do so. So, that's one of my responsibilities. The other thing that we all do is just one of the things we did really well, and one of the things that I was personally very appreciative of, is we each have our kind of own separate areas in the kitchen to keep our like food or other dishes and things like that. And nobody's really breached that. And I have kept my stuff, if you will, in my own area. So that's been very helpful, just so that nothing gets mixed up. I will say sometimes when there have been some dishes in the sink and somebody just washes something, they inadvertently take my my fork or whatever, this and that, but that's okay. I usually just talk to them about that. It's not a big deal. But one of the most important things when navigating these responsibilities is just communication, and constant and open communication with our roommates. We have of course, like a group chat through text where we talk about like, hey, can somebody do this or this, or like, hey, I'm gonna do this thing, just so you know, yada yada yada, or like things of that nature. We also just talk to each other quite a bit. And also, just as a cane user, I think just making sure that there's not like excessive things on the ground or in the way. And we did have a discussion about that at the beginning of the semester as well. So I hope that helps.
Yes, that's honestly such a key factor in life, which is just being able to communicate with people. And so I think this is a transferable skill that so many of us can take away from. And so Casey, I'm gonna hand it off to you.
Yeah, so as far as divvying out responsibilities and advocating, I think that something that helped us to work cohesively, especially as far as maintaining our apartment in terms of taking trash out and doing the dishes and just overall upkeep and maintenance of the place, was we were able to be vulnerable with with each other. Like, I was able to tell them, hey guys, to be completely honest with you, I'm horrible at sweeping the floor, right? And another man was said, I'm not very good at cleaning the dishes, and so on and so forth. And so I think this goes along very well with what Nikki said about constant communication, constant open communication, because for us, we were able to communicate what we were good at and what we were not good at. We were able to kind of leverage each other's strengths and weaknesses and kind of, help in a way build each other up and make sure that all of our responsibilities are being met, and we were able to maintain the cleanliness of the apartment. So yeah, we basically kept a constant flow of communication, and if anything, we were able to learn from each other. Like I said earlier, I'm very bad at sweeping the floor. And so one of my roommates gave me some tips and tricks in terms of how to sweep the floor. And I was able to tailor it to meet my needs, using grid system and whatnot, just to make it a little bit more blind friendly. And in terms of being a guide user with this, when you're a guide dog user, you are constantly on a routine. So, for example, I take my dog out like at least 3 to 5 times a day, right? And so I have certain alarms for that. Meal times, we try to be consistent with that as well, twice a day. And so my roommates were aware of the times that I was generally taking my dog out, feeding her, and even grooming, just so they can, be aware of the things that we're doing. And, it's not going to come to a shock to them like, oh, I'm cleaning my dog's ear, her ears in the living room, and one of my roommates comes out, and they know that that's happening. They know that I set a specific day to maintain, especially some of her hygienic needs and whatnot. I think that having that open communication allowed us to also build in flexibility. For example, like, oh, let's say one day I was not able to take my dog out at a specific time, and so my roommates were able to work with me to find. Oh, I remember the reason. It was because I couldn't take my dog out, a specific reason, because there's actually some construction going on around the area of our apartments, and so we literally could not find a place to go. Like, there's a lot of cement and whatnot, and so I could not find any grass. And so we had to, kind of work through that. And like I said, I was able to communicate that with my roommates, and someone was able to, help us find another strip of grass that was around the area and whatnot. But the moral of the story is, like I said, and I know I'm just echoing a lot of what Nikki says, but it's very, very important, is keeping that communication, because if anything, the open communication can lead to, like I said, flexibilities, and you guys can work together as a household to work towards solutions. And I just think that it's gonna make your experience overall living together very, very successful.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, communication is super important. And I think a lot of the points you touched on can be useful for all of us. in the future. Noah, I think you should take it away now.
Final two questions for both of you. In your opinion, what makes a good roommate relationship and why? And what would be your advice to blind college students about to room with a roommate for the first time? So, Casey, you're up first.
So my advice for any blind student who's looking to move out of their own home for the first time or move into specifically a roommate area is to know yourself, like know your schedule, know your needs, know what if someone's going, because these people are going to be new living with you. So if they're going to be living with you, you should be able to explain to them the type of person you are. Like, I am an early morning person. I don't like a lot of noise early in the morning, like stuff like that. Because if you're able to tell someone about yourself, then they're going to, know what to expect. So conversely, knowing yourself as a roommate and the kind of person that you are to live with is important. But then on the other hand, knowing and having expectations of your roommate is also very, very good, just so you can kind of lay the groundwork for yourself as a roommate and you can, work cohesively with the type of person you are. But just know that when you do have those expectations, they may not always be able to be met because everyone's different, right? And so being able to be flexible in this regard, I think will also help you to make your experience very, very, just smooth. I'm not saying that's going to be very positive, but definitely smoother.
Thanks a lot, Casey. Yeah, honestly, that has been my experience too, is that if you're a good communicator and if you really work on your communication skills with your roommates about what kind of person you are, and if they can do the same with you, it really is going to make your life and their lives so much easier and at least set you off on the right foot to have a really good roommate experience, hopefully. Or at least that's really a good step to sort of start with and work towards. All right, Nikki, you're closing us out.
Well, first of all, I just want to say how great it's been to be with you all today to talk about this very important issue with the roommates. And I think it is something that we should pay more attention to and give more voice on that too as well. But to answer your question, first of all, what would make a good roommate is somebody who not just who you communicate with about, household tasks and having routine and things of that nature, as Casey went over, but also somebody who you can bond over certain things and somebody who you can have fun with outside of when you're busy working or at school or what have you. I think it is very important to develop a good, close relationship with your roommates. Not only just that, but I think having that relationship too, of course, would lead to having fun, but also leads to a better way of communicating when there's a problem. So, I cannot emphasize this enough. It is very important, especially, when you need some adaptations done or some things adjusted as a blind student or some certain things changes, etc. It is critical that you communicate with your roommates whenever possible, and having that really good relationship adds to that ability to communicate with one another. Secondly, some advice: just I would say be open to the idea. Be open when you go to college to make new friends, to try something new, to get out of your comfort zone, and perhaps, and that's obviously easier said than done. And I'm not going to pretend to you today that this process is easy or smooth with no bumps in the road. It's not, and I doubt it will be. However, know that you will gain and learn so much out of your experiences being a roommate, and know that you will come out of it a better person who has learned some new skills, had some fun, become a better communicator, and learn more about sharing in common environments and spaces outside of home and living independently, not under the watchful eye of your family. So, and again, I will emphasize too that communicating is, as always, and always will be, critical to a positive roommate relationship. So communicate, be vocal about what you need to do, but also one more thing I will say before closing is talk to your friends and those others who you trust about any problems you have too, and they will have great, valuable advice for you. So that's what I would say.
Thanks a lot, Nikki. And absolutely, friends make the world go round. And funnily enough, you might just end up with a few more friends if you're really hitting it off with your roommates and having a great time. I mean, I know lots of people who are absolute best friends with their roommate and did not expect that to happen at all. And they're better for it and vice versa. So thank you so much for pointing that out. And also sort of when things are tough, turn to your friends, ask for advice, talk to people, figure out what the best course of action is. Absolutely. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you both tonight, and I really appreciate your insights and your willingness to pop on and spend time with us this evening. And I'd just like to ask, is there anything else that either of you would like to add to this evening's episode for our lovely audience?
Not for me.
Yeah, not for me either. Just keep having a great time in college and be prepared to be excited by the unexpected, the unknown.
Absolutely. I joined that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, yes, you, for listening to this episode. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate the support. If you would like to be a part of the discussions surrounding upcoming episodes, have your say, suggest topics, and much more, please consider joining our WhatsApp community. We'll have that linked in a place where you can get to it. And as always, keep it locked here on the Nabs Now podcast feed for all sorts of new episodes coming up. We'll have one next month, a super special blind month episode. You won't want to miss it. I can't say too much now, but it's going to be a really good one. So keep locked in here. Keep an eye on your podcast app of choice next month. But until then, I'm Noah Carver. She is
Akliesia Teshome, and thank you guys so much for listening.